Hello everyone, this is OJ back with another video. Today we're going to predict every fight on UFC Vegas 105, Josh Emmett versus Lerone Murphy. Overall, this is a very solid card for an Apex event. Main event is great. There are a couple of hidden gems on the card that I'm looking forward to watch. We're going to start off with the early prelims, end with the main event, and without wasting any more time, let's jump straight into the video. First fight on the card, we have Vanessa Demopoulos versus Talita Alenkar. I don't know who Talita Alenkar is, and I don't remember even watching a Vanessa Demopoulos fight for quite some time. I don't care enough to actually study film for Demopoulos versus Alenkar. Therefore, I will base this prediction on who has the uglier record overall. I'm going to base this solely off the fact that Demopoulos has experience in the UFC. Meanwhile, Talita Alenkar is relatively untested. She's coming off a loss to Stephanie Luciano, and Luciano is decent at best. I'm going to pick Demopoulos to get this done. If I had to guess, probably via control time 29-28 decision. Moving on to an actual fight I'm excited for, we have Victor Henry versus Pedro Falcao. I'm going to go with Pedro Falcao. Hear me out on this one. I know that a majority of people are going with Victor Henry, but I just do not rate Henry's submission defense. Just watch his fight with Charles Jourdain, where Jourdain just kept pulling the same power guillotine over and over again, but eventually was able to catch Henry because Henry keeps his head on the outside whenever he shoots takedowns. I know Falcao is very open on the feet, but keep in mind his fight with Victor Hugo was on relatively short notice. Plus, you have to note that Henry is now 37 years old, fighting at bantamweight. Sooner or later, Victor Henry is going to decline, and I would argue that he already has because he hasn't had an impressive winning performance since his fight with Raoni Barcelos back in 2022. I know Pedro Falcao is good enough to get a submission win over Victor Henry over the course of 3 rounds on a full training camp. And I don't see Henry having that big advantage on the feet for me to definitively say that Henry can just piece up Falcao over the course of 15 minutes. I'm going to pick Pedro Falcao to win via submission. Moving on to Loma Lookboon versus Estela Nunes. I rate Lona Lagboom as a pretty good Muay Thai striker, and I don't rate Estela Nunes as a fighter. That's literally the only analysis I need. How is Estela Nunes still on the roster in 2025? She has a 6-5 record with 0 wins and 4 losses in the UFC. Now, Lagboon hasn't fought in a while. Her last fight was against Bruna Brazil last year, who is far better than Estela Nunes in my opinion. I'm gonna go with Lugbun to win a dominant decision, and hopefully Estela Nunes gets cut off the roster very soon. Moving on to Reese McKee versus Daniel Frueza. I'm gonna pick Daniel Frueza because I just can't trust Reese McKee to win a fight in 2025. Reese McKee is 0-4 in the UFC. How is he still on the roster in 2025? Now, his losses aren't horrible. Like, I got destroyed by Hamza Chimaev. It happens. Then he lost to Alex Morono dominantly. Then he got cut and won some fights in the regional scene, only to come back to lose to Chidi Nijikwani and Anj Lusa. Like, how many times are we going to repeat the same mistake over and over again, picking Reese McKee to win a fight? There is no logical way you can look at Reese McKee's performances in the UFC and go, yeah, I'm going to pick McKee to win this one. Again, Daniel Ferreira, I don't know much about this guy, but I rate anybody making their debut in the UFC a lot higher than Reese McKee. Therefore, I will pick Daniel Ferreira to win this fight. Moving on, we have Diana Balbita versus Dion Barboza. I'm gonna go with Dion Barboza because she just looks more like a man. If you were expecting some technical analysis between Diana Balbita versus Dion Barboza, you're not in the right channel because I guarantee that all of you watching this video have never even heard of either of these two women before. And also, if you're getting submitted by Molly McCann at any point in your career, then I'm sorry, Diana Belbita. I can never trust you to win a UFC fight. I've never watched tape on Diana Barboza, but I'm picking her to win because Bambita is a pretty woman who got submitted by fucking Molly McCann. Moving on to Davy Grant versus Daniel Santos, one of the sleeper fights on this card. And as fun as Davy Grant is fun to watch, I'm picking Daniel Santos to eke out a very controversial decision. Now, when you put these two guys side by side, Grant should have all the answers to pick apart Daniel Santos over the course of 3 rounds. Because Santos is a guy that thrives in the pocket. He's got the shooter box Muay Thai style similar to Charles Oliveira and Elvis Brenner, while Davy Grant is a very elusive kickboxer with way better technique compared to Daniel Santos. But the reason I'm picking Daniel Santos is because you cannot trust the judges to score the fight fairly for Davy Grant. As unfortunate of a reason that may be, we've already seen this happen to Davy Grant multiple times throughout his career. The loss to Adrian Yanez was bullshit. The loss to Daniel Marcos was also bullshit. Unless it's an opponent I know Davy Grant is just that much better than, where he can comfortably school them for 3 rounds straight, I just can't see fights ever being scored fairly to Davy Grant. I think Santos is good enough to make this somewhat competitive. And if you're somewhat competitive with Grant as an upcoming prospect, there is a good chance that you will get the decision via robbery. I'm picking Daniel Santos to win this fight 29-28 by robbery decision, unironically. Up the card, we have Ode Osborne versus Luis Gurule. I'm gonna go with Luis Gurule. I watched Gurule's fight on the Contender Series, and it was fucking fire. I still think the guy Guruli fought should have won the fight, but Guruli showed me a lot of good things throughout this fight. He's got hella output on the feet, and his scrambles are very nice. The guy he fought was a very good wrestler, which is why Gurule had a hard time implementing his own grappling. But I think Gurule is good enough to get the takedowns against a guy like Ode Osborne. Ode Osborne is in a very similar situation to Reese McKee. You can't really pick Osborne to win a fight in 2025. I know Osborne does have good performances here and there, but he's lost 4 out of his last 5 fights. And that one win to Charles Johnson was arguably a robbery. And yes, Osborne should have got the win over Ronaldo Rodriguez in his last fight at the Sphere, but in hindsight, Rodriguez is absolute dog shit. Osborne does have the range advantage in this fight, but he's not so great inside the pocket or when people try to wrestle him. I believe Gurule has the tools to get inside there and make it a dirty fight over the course of 3 rounds. I'm gonna go with Luis Gurule to either win via dominant decision or possibly find a KO shot in the pocket throughout the fight. Moving up the card to Torres Finney versus Robert Valentin. As sad as this makes me feel, I'm gonna go with Torres Finney. I was a huge fan of Robert Valentin during his time on Tough because he was a fucking blast. I remember watching his press conference about speaking to the Norse gods in the middle of the woods after taking a shit ton of psychedelic mushrooms. Very based stuff indeed. I know Valentin lost because he tore shoulder in the middle of the fight with whoever he was fighting at Tough, but that fight showed me a huge flaw in Valentin's game, and that Valentin loves to back up way too much. And I see that coming to his detriment against a power puncher like Torres Finney. Finney has been on an absolute tear through the middleweight division. Despite looking like Geodude from Pokemon, time and time again, Finney has put on impressive performances after impressive performances. And the fact that the UFC did not sign this guy a lot sooner, it was kind of annoying, but I'm glad that Finney is here. That being said, I don't believe Valentin has the aggression in his game to really get the respect out of a guy like Torres Finney. Maybe if this fight goes to the later rounds, Valentin could find a submission, but submitting a ball of muscle like Torres Finney is extremely difficult because the guy has no neck to even choke out in the first place. I hope Valentin can prove himself, but I'm gonna go with Torres Finney, just backing Valentin up against the fence and finding an early round TKO. Moving on to Brad Tavares versus Gerald Meerschaert. Hear me out on this one. I'm gonna go with my GOAT, Gerald Meerschaert, on this one. Now I know Tavares is extremely hard to take down, but I don't see Tavares really being able to put away GM3 early, And that is what you need to beat a guy like GM3. Unless you're incredibly strong like Rainer the Ritter, it's very difficult to beat a guy like GM3 in the later rounds. I suspect GM3 is struggling early on as Tavares gets the better shots on the feet, and GM3 fails the first few takedowns. But when the third round hits, both fighters are starting to look very sloppy. I reckon GM3 will finally be able to get his first takedown and eventually secure himself the signature GM3 arm triangle late in the third round. And again, I could be wrong on this one because, again, Brad Tavares is extremely hard to take down. But once you take down Brad Tavares, he is a fish out of water when it comes to his jujitsu. If GM3 can take him down, I expect GM3 to win. It's just gonna be depending on when he gets it through, because I suspect it to be a hard fight early on, but by round 3, GM3 will do GM3 things. Moving on to the feature fight of the card, Kennedy Nizuchuku versus Martin Buday. This is pretty obvious. I'm gonna go with Kennedy Nizuchuku because Kennedy isn't this obese blob monster like Martin Buday. Martin Buday arguably lost to 45-year-old Andrei Arlovsky, who is now under the senior citizen home known as the GFL. And it was Buday who was gassing out as the fight progressed. Sure, Buday can look great against the likes of Josh Parisian, who is essentially a melting ice cream scoop, but against actual athletic specimens like the heavyweight goat Shamil Gaziev, Uday has shown little capability to keep up with them physically. Now, Kennedy does take a while to throw any output, so if the first few rounds Bude decides to just clinch him up against the fence, I reckon Bude can find some success. But by the third round, I expect Kennedy Nizuchuku to get the job done and find Martin Bude's chin. Moving up the card, we have Fortavious Romeus versus Chang Ho Lee. I'm picking Chang Ho Lee. Now, there is personal bias here because Chang O Lee is a Korean fighter that has been hyped up as the next big thing by Hang Sung Jung himself. But I'm not picking Chang O Lee because of that. I'm picking Lee because he's actually pretty good. He has a win over Xiao Long, which is a very good win in hindsight, considering how good Long looked in his last fight. Lee has a hell of a chin, his cardio is on point, and his body work in the clinch is nasty. The only way I see Chango Lee losing is to a guy who can snipe you at distance because Lee is very hittable. But Cortavius Romeus isn't that type of fighter. If anything, his fight with Gaston Bolaño showed that he is a hyperactive bull on the feet who primarily likes to get the fight to the ground. I don't see that working against a guy like Chang Ho Lee, who is strong and will work the fuck out of your body if necessary. I expect a hell of a scrap, but the difference is that Lee has the better durability and gas tank to take this fight into the deep end. Maybe Romeus does get a finish early on, but end of round 2, and by round 3, Lee will be definitively ahead on the scorecards to win a 29-28 decision. Moving on to the co-main event, Pat Sabatini versus Joe Anderson Brito. I'm picking Joe Anderson Brito. Problem I have with Pat Sabatini is that on the feet, he is essentially a helpless victim. Now, could Sabatini fluke a triangle armbar or some freaky shit he usually seems to do in the majority of his fights? Yes, but then again, on the feet, I can smell a Joe Anderson Brito KO this fight. Now, Brito did not show the level of dominance I expected him to show against William Gomez, but in hindsight, William Gomez is a lot better than I anticipated. Plus, the reason Gomez was able to survive as long as he did against Joe Anderson Brito is because he has elusive footwork, something that Sabatini does not have. At some point, Brito is going to catch Sabatini and he's going to badly drop him, and I don't think Sabatini's jiu-jitsu will be enough to stop the onslaught. I'm picking Joe Anderson Brito to knock out Pat Sabatini probably around the end of the first, if not the second. And even if he doesn't, I reckon Brito will be good enough to survive the submission attempts and just piece up Sabatini for 3 rounds. Finally, we get to the main event between Josh Emmett versus Lerone Murphy. I'm going to go with Lerone Murphy on this fight because it's hard to pick Emmett when he is now 40 years old, fighting at featherweight. I know Emmett's last fight, he sent Bryce Mitchell to the Shadow Realm, but that was December of 2023, and he hasn't fought since. Now, do I rate Lerone Murphy all that highly. Not really. And if he beats Josh Emmett, I don't think Murphy is going to progress that much further the rankings. That being said, I think Murphy will be elusive enough to stay out of Emmett's power and control the distance. Listen, people are pointing out the fact that Dan Ige was able to clip Leroy Murphy, but I think Dan Ige is a lot cleaner than Josh Emmett. Sure, Emmett has way more power, but Ige throws a lot more output with a lot more varying techniques, which is how Ige was able to clip Murphy in the first place. If the fight goes past the first round, do we really trust Josh Emmett being able to find the knockout shot? Josh Emmett is 40 years old, fighting in the 5 rounder. How much longer is Josh Emmett going to fight before Father Time catches up with him? Plus, if Murphy finds himself in trouble, I think he can out grapple Josh Emmett. Josh Emmett has rarely been tested on the ground, and the times he did were when Yair Rodriguez submitted him off the back foot with a textbook triangle. You're telling me that Leroy Murphy can't find at least dominant control, if not a possible submission against Josh Emmett, if Yair Rodriguez was able to do so? The only way Emmett wins is if he finds the knockout shot. Can that happen? Maybe, but we've seen guys being able to survive the full distance against Josh Emmett, like Calvin Cater and Dan Ige were able to do so. It's not like Josh Emmett just puts out everyone, and I believe that Leroy Murphy is good enough to control the range for the majority of the fight. I'm gonna go with Leroy Murphy to win via 49-46 decision in rather an uneventful fight. All right, that's where I'm going to end this video for today. Let me know in the comments down below who you believe the winners will be for this week's event, and also what you rate the card overall, because again, for an Apex card, this is all right. Other than that, make sure to like and subscribe, and I will see you guys next time. Peace.